The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 47 star systems with the kind of methodical efficiency that would make a tax collector weep with joy. Their secret? A devastatingly simple three-step process: arrive, intimidate, assimilate. It had worked on the crystal-singing melodians of Kepler 442b, the hive-minded buzzers of Proxima Centauri, and even the notoriously stubborn rock-eaters of Titan Prime. Ambassador Crixtal adjusted his ceremonial battle cloak as his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, approached the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. The humans called it Earth, though frankly, Crixtal thought Dirtball would have been more accurate. His preliminary scans showed a species that had barely crawled out of their own atmosphere, still burning fossil fuels like cave dwellers rubbing sticks together. "Sir," his aide Vexlon chirped from the navigation console, "the primitives are attempting to communicate." Crixtal's mandibles clicked in amusement. Of course they were. Every species tried to negotiate once they realized the alternative was planetary glassing. Put them through. Let's see what these dirt scratchers have to say. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a human female in what appeared to be military dress. She had dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else in the universe. Behind her, Crixtal could see a room filled with other humans, all wearing the same expression of mild inconvenience. "Greetings, primitive life forms," Crixtal began in his most intimidating tone. "I am Ambassador Crixtal of the Zephyrian Empire. You will surrender your planet immediately, or face the consequences." The human female, according to his translation matrix, her name was Commander Elena Vasquez, looked at him for a long moment. Then she sighed, actually sighed, as if dealing with a galactic empire was equivalent to explaining to her grandmother why she couldn't fix the Wi-Fi over the phone. "Right," Elena said, leaning back in her chair. "Let me guess, you're here to demand tribute, resources, and our unconditional surrender. If we refuse, you'll demonstrate your superior firepower by blowing up something we care about. Then you'll give us 24 hours to comply before you start the real fireworks. Am I close?" Crixtal's confidence wavered slightly. This wasn't the usual cowering he'd come to expect. "You understand the situation correctly." "Fantastic," Elena replied, examining her fingernails. "Here's the thing, Ambassador. We're going to have to pass on your generous offer." "Pass?" Vexlon whispered, his voice box crackling with confusion. "Sir, I don't think the translation matrix is working properly." "It's working fine," Elena continued, apparently having heard them. "I said no, thanks, but no thanks. We're good here." Crixtal felt his primary heart skip a beat. In 47 conquests, no species had ever simply said no. They begged, they negotiated, they offered alternatives, but they never just refused. "Perhaps you misunderstand," he said, his voice rising to what he hoped was a more threatening pitch. "We have the power to obliterate your entire planet. Our fleet contains enough firepower to turn your world into cosmic dust." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "I'm sure you do. Very impressive. Must have taken a lot of resources to build all those ships." "It did," Crixtal replied, momentarily thrown off by what seemed like genuine interest. "And you've used this fleet to conquer what, 47 systems? 47 systems, yes. Wow. That's quite a track record." Elena paused, as if considering something. "Tell me, Ambassador, in all those conquests, did any of those species ever fight back effectively?" Crixtal puffed out his chest plates. "None could stand against the might of the Zephyrian Empire." "Right, because they were all unprepared." "Makes sense." Elena leaned forward, and for the first time, Crixtal noticed that her eyes weren't just bored. They were calculating. "The thing is, Ambassador, we've been watching you, watching us." "Oh yes, for about 60 years now. Ever since you first started broadcasting your conquest announcements on subspace frequencies. You know, for a species that prides itself on superior technology, your communication security is remarkably poor." Crixtal felt his secondary hearts join the first in their erratic rhythm. "That's impossible. Our encryption is..." Your encryption is based on mathematical principles that assume your enemies are operating at your technological level. Elena interrupted. But see, when you're conquering species that are still using chemical rockets, you tend to get a bit lazy about information security. She gestured to someone off-screen, and a new human appeared. This one was male, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen more than his share of unpleasant surprises. This is Captain Marcus Chen, Elena said by way of introduction. He's been tracking your fleet movements for the past 3 years. Marcus, would you like to tell our guests what you've learned? Marcus stepped forward, with the casual confidence of someone who knew exactly how dangerous he was. Well, Elena, it's fascinating really. The Zephyrians follow a very predictable pattern. They arrive in system, usually with a force of 12 to 15 ships, 3 heavy cruisers, 6 destroyers, and the rest are support vessels. They position themselves at a standard distance of 0.7 AU from the primary inhabited planet, and begin their intimidation protocol. Crystal's mandibles had gone completely rigid. This human was reciting Zephyrian military doctrine with the precision of a fleet commander. Their weapons are impressive, Marcus continued, but they're designed for maximum psychological impact rather than strategic effectiveness. Lots of flash, lots of noise, but ultimately they're built to fight enemies who panic easily. How do you know this? Crystal demanded. Elena smiled for the first time since the conversation began, and it was not a pleasant expression. Because, Ambassador, we've been preparing for you, all of you, every aggressive species in the local arm of the galaxy. Another human appeared on screen. This one a woman with sharp eyes, and the kind of smile that suggested she enjoyed solving problems that other people found impossible. Dr. Priya Nakamura, Elena said. She's been reverse engineering your technology based on the debris fields you leave behind after your conquests. Priya, how's the project coming along? Dr. Nakamura's smile widened. We've made some improvements to the original designs. Turns out, when you're not limited by the need to make everything look intimidating, you can focus on making it actually effective. Improvements, Vexilon squeaked. Oh yes, Dr. Nakamura replied cheerfully. For instance, your particle beam weapons are very pretty, but they're terribly inefficient. We've managed to triple the power output while reducing the energy requirements by 40%. And don't get me started on your shield technology. It's like you designed it specifically to look impressive rather than actually protect anything. Crystal was beginning to suspect that this conversation was not going according to plan. You're bluffing. Even if you've studied our technology, you're still just one planet. We have an empire. That's true, Elena acknowledged. You do have an empire, built on the conquest of unprepared technologically inferior species. But here's the thing, Ambassador, we're not unprepared, and we're not inferior. She gestured again, and the view screen split to show multiple images, massive orbital platforms, sleek ships that looked nothing like the crude chemical rockets Crystal had expected, and weapons batteries that seemed to be targeting his own fleet with uncomfortable precision. We've been building, Elena said simply. For 60 years we've been building and preparing and learning. Every species you've conquered we've studied. Every weapon you've used we've improved upon. Every tactic you've employed we've developed countermeasures for. This is impossible, Crystal protested. Our intelligence reports indicated that you were still a primitive species. Your intelligence reports were based on what we wanted you to see, Marcus interjected. Did you really think a species clever enough to split the atom and build quantum computers wouldn't be smart enough to fake a few satellite transmissions? Elena nodded. We've been very careful to maintain the illusion that we're still struggling with basic spaceflight. Meanwhile, we've been building a defense network that would make your Imperial fleet look like a collection of antique toys. You're lying, Crystal said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Elena asked. Vexilon, is it? Would you mind scanning the third moon of our outer gas giant? Vexilon looked to Crystal, who nodded reluctantly. The aide's face went pale as he read the results. Sir, Vexilon whispered, there's nothing there. Exactly, Elena said. We removed it last Tuesday. Not destroyed, mind you. Removed completely. It's currently in orbit around Proxima Centauri, where we've been using it as a testing ground for our new mining equipment." The bridge of the Eternal Dominion went completely silent. In the background, Crystal could hear the nervous clicking of his crew's mandibles. "Now," Elena continued, her voice taking on a tone that suggested she was rapidly losing patience, "I'm going to give you a choice, Ambassador. You can turn around and leave our system, and we'll pretend this conversation never happened. Or you can continue with your standard intimidation protocol, and we'll show you exactly what happens when a prepared species decides it's had enough." Crystal looked around his bridge, seeing fear in the eyes of beings who had helped conquer 47 worlds. "You wouldn't dare attack us. We have the backing of the entire Galactic Council." Elena laughed, and it was not a sound that inspired confidence. "The Galactic Council? You mean the collection of species that's been too terrified to stand up to you for the past century?" "Ambassador, the Council isn't backing you. They're hoping you'll succeed so they don't have to deal with you anymore." She stood up, and for the first time Crystal noticed that every human in the background had also risen. They weren't wearing the expressions of terrified primitives facing an overwhelming force. They were wearing the expressions of predators who had finally cornered their prey. "Here's what's going to happen," Elena said, her voice dropping to a conversational tone that was somehow more terrifying than any shouting. "You're going to leave. You're going to go back to your empire and tell them that Earth is off limits. You're going to spread the word that humans are not to be approached, contacted, or conquered." "And if we refuse?" Crystal asked, though he was increasingly certain he didn't want to hear the answer. Elena's smile returned, and this time it was genuinely terrifying. "If you refuse, Ambassador, you'll discover why every species in this galaxy should be grateful that humans are generally peaceful. Because when we're not peaceful, when we're genuinely angry, when we've been pushed too far." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "Well, let's just say that your 47-world empire will become a cautionary tale that other species tell their children to keep them from misbehaving." "You're bluffing," Crystal said again, but he was already signaling his navigator to begin calculating jump coordinates. "Am I?" Elena asked. "Captain Chen, would you mind showing our guests what we've been working on?" Marcus nodded and made a gesture towards someone off-screen. Suddenly every alarm on the Eternal Dominion began screaming at once. "Sir," Vexillon shouted over the noise, "we're being targeted by everything. Every ship in our fleet is being painted by targeting systems I've never seen before." "Those are our new defense platforms," Dr. Nakamura said helpfully. "We've positioned them throughout the system over the past few years. They're currently locked onto every critical system on every ship in your fleet. Life support, navigation, weapons, shields, everything. The beautiful thing about human engineering," Elena added, "is that we don't build things to look impressive. We build them to work. And right now, Ambassador, they're working perfectly." Crystal stared at the humans on his screen, finally understanding that he was not dealing with a primitive species. He was dealing with a species that had spent 60 years preparing for this exact moment, and they had prepared very, very well. "We'll leave," he said quietly. "Smart choice," Elena replied. "Oh, and Ambassador, when you report back to your superiors, make sure you mention something important." "What's that?" Elena's expression grew serious. "We're not angry with you. We're not seeking revenge for the threats you've made or the species you've conquered. We're just disappointed. Disappointed that a species with your capabilities chose to use them for conquest rather than exploration. Disappointed that you decided to be bullies rather than builders." She paused, letting that sink in. "Because Ambassador, if we were angry, if we were seeking revenge, your fleet would already be scrap metal floating in the void. The fact that you're still alive to have this conversation should tell you everything you need to know about human restraint. And if that restraint ever disappears?" Crystal asked, though he was afraid of the answer. Elena's smile returned, but this time it was sad rather than threatening. "Then Ambassador, not even your deities will be able to protect you. Because when humans truly snap, when we abandon restraint and embrace our darker nature, we don't just fight wars, we perfect them." The transmission ended, leaving Crystal staring at a blank screen. Around him his crew waited for orders. their faces reflecting the same mixture of fear and confusion that he felt. "Sir," Vexillon whispered. "What are your orders?" Crystal looked around his bridge, taking in the faces of beings who had helped him conquer worlds, and realized that they were all looking to him for guidance in a situation none of them had ever encountered before. "Set course for Zephyrian Prime," he said finally. "Maximum speed." "Sir, should we report this to the council?" Crystal thought about Elena's words, about the disappointment in her voice, about the casual way she'd described removing a moon from its orbit. He thought about the targeting systems that had locked onto his fleet with the precision of a surgical instrument, and about the implications of a species that had spent 60 years preparing for a war they hoped never to fight. "Yes," he said, "we report this immediately. And we recommend that Earth be classified as a Class X restricted zone." "Class X?" Vexillon asked. "But sir, that's reserved for species that pose an existential threat to galactic civilization." Crystal nodded slowly. "Exactly." 6 months later, Ambassador Crystal sat in his new office on Zephyrian Prime, reviewing reports from across the galaxy. His title had changed. He was now the Empire's senior advisor on human affairs, a position that existed solely to ensure that no Zephyrian ever made the mistake of approaching Earth again. The reports made for interesting reading. The Galactic Council had unanimously voted to classify humans as a Do Not Disturb species, a designation previously reserved for godlike entities and cosmic anomalies. Trade routes had been rerouted to avoid the Sol system entirely. Several aggressive species had quietly abandoned their expansion plans after learning about the human encounter. Most interesting of all, however, were the reports from the Outer Rim. Human ships, sleek, efficient vessels that bore no resemblance to the primitive craft they'd been pretending to use, had begun appearing in unclaimed systems. They weren't conquering anything, weren't making demands or threats. They were simply there, exploring, cataloging, building. Crystal had to admit, it was rather impressive. In 6 months humans had established peaceful contact with 17 species, set up trade agreements with 9, and had begun construction on what appeared to be a massive space station in the neutral zone. They were doing exactly what Elena had said they would do, building rather than conquering. His communication console chimed, and Crystal looked up to see a priority transmission from the council chambers. He opened the channel to find High Counselor Zexthara, her tentacles writhing with agitation. "Ambassador," she said without preamble, "we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The humans have established a colony in the Vega system." Crystal felt his heart skip a beat. "A military colony?" "No, that's just it. It's a research station. They're studying the local star formation patterns and have invited other species to participate in their research." "That doesn't sound like a problem." Zexthara's tentacles writhed faster. "They've also solved the energy crisis on Altair Falk, ended the territorial dispute between the Crystalline Empire and the Hive collectives, and yesterday they sent us a detailed proposal for a new interspecies communication protocol that would eliminate the need for translation matrices." Crystal stared at the screen. "They're helping. They're making themselves indispensable," Zexthara corrected. "At this rate, half the galaxy will be dependent on human technology within a decade." As Crystal ended the transmission, he couldn't help but laugh. The humans had done exactly what they'd promised. They'd shown the galaxy what happened when a truly advanced species chose cooperation over conquest. And now, instead of ruling through fear and intimidation like the Zephyrians, they were quietly becoming the most important species in the galaxy simply by being useful. He pulled up the latest intelligence report on human activities and shook his head in grudging admiration. Elena had been right about one thing. Humans didn't just fight wars, they perfected them. But they also apparently perfected peace. And perhaps that was the most terrifying thing of all.